Welcome all to Life Part 2. Walker, we start with the idea, Boomer, X, Y, that these are three alien species that, don't get along, but we know that they're children and grandchildren of each other. Could you give us a quick market anthropological overlook of these three groups, their similarities, their differences?
Sure. Well, if you look at baby boomers, this is the group, the post-World War II fertility boom between 1946 and 1964. Their youth has always been a celebrated aspect of every part of their generational experience, and so youthfulness is probably the best way to think about baby boomers. Novelty, new experiences, breaking the rules, doing things differently, reinventing themselves constantly through life. They're followed then by the baby bust after the baby boom, this so-called Generation X, not a name they gave to themselves. This was kind of a name that boomers gave to them in the late 80s and early 1990s. But really a generation that grew up with a very different formative experience. Savvy is much more the concept that describes their approach to life. And then you have the generation that we just saw a lot of, the 20-somethings, the late teens today, Generation Y, the millennials. This is a generation that is much more focused on authenticity, real, genuine experiences, getting beyond all the hype. So they come at life in very different ways. It creates these kinds of conflicts. I think it's a lot of misunderstanding that we see. We listen to these baby boomers, they're almost talking as if they're their parents, talking about them when they were coming of age.
The boomers themselves grew up in a time of an expanding economy, and they felt lucky and privileged. Their kids, on the other hand, feel entitled. And there's more than just a semantic difference between feeling privileged and feeling entitled. And I think that sense of entitlement is at the heart of a lot of the conflict between these two generations.
Well, let's see how it works. Tammy, a boomer, this is not a joke, a boomer, an Xer, and a Y walk into a widget factory, and the idea is to create the new sniff and touch widget. Do they approach the problem differently?
Absolutely. Boomers, the other thing about boomers when they were growing up, of course, is they were basically surrounded by a huge number of other boomers. So boomers have squeezed through a keyhole in life that was pretty small. A lot of boomers went to high school in temporary buildings out behind the main building because there weren't enough classrooms. Boomers have kind of a mental mindset that says we're playing musical chairs. There aren't enough seats, so I have to run fast. So a boomer would approach your challenge by thinking about, how can I win? How can I develop one that's going to set me apart and move me ahead? The Xer is self-reliant, and so they're going to be thinking about, what if this doesn't pan out? Do I have another job offer? Do I have another option that I could move to if this one's not going to be successful? If you jump to the Ys, on the other hand, they're much more used to reaching out to lots of people. So they'd solicit input from, what do you think? What do you think? And gather that input in as they start to formulate their plan.
Now, it sounds insoluble. I'm bankrupting the widget company right now. But is there something valuable in these three approaches? I mean, can it be put to work?
Yes, absolutely. I think that can be put to work. I think what it requires is for each of us to kind of let go of the negative prejudice and recognize the good things that each one can bring.
But, one of the things that has certainly changed between these generations, and you see this when you talk to them, is that baby boomers really sort of pioneered this focus on myself. And so there was a decline in all sorts of community organizations and community interests that parallel the rise of baby boomers in American society. What you see with Gen X and with the millennials or the Y generation is much more of a focus on connection and engagement. So they are interested in their parents. They are interested in social networking kinds of technologies. Boomers are now coming back to this.
What's an example of that, something that was lost and found?
Well, interest in family. If you were to ask baby boomers, as we did way back in the 1970s, as they were just, the early boomers were getting into their late 20s and early 30s, and we asked them how important are various kinds of things as life priorities, family would be down on the list. It would be below, self-improvement. It would be below work. Now you look at Gen X in their 30s. They're now sort of in this stage of household formation. And family is at the absolute top of their list. They are unwilling to make the kind of sacrifices to family that boomers were willing to make in order to advance their
Well, I
careers.
certainly see that in my kids.
Yeah, I agree
Boomers
with
were
that,
not willing
Walker.
to make the sacrifice that a previous generation did.
Yeah, that's
Even
exactly right. Yes,
boomers-
and boomers were much more self-focused.
We, as boomers, were influenced by our World War II generation, Depression-era parents who only wanted for us that we be economically secured. Our happiness was not a major issue for them. But, for our kids, our value for them was not that they be economically secure because we took advantage, we just assumed, since
Right.
we grew up in an expanding economy, we assumed that they would be okay.
Well, I think we have promised the audience some therapeutic tips. So anybody got, any kind of nice little things you can do when you go to my widget factory tomorrow?
One of the things, when I work with a senior executive who's complaining about a why, who's driving him or her crazy, usually the easiest thing I say is, do you have any children? And the minute I say that, the person goes, oh, yeah, because it suddenly clicks that what they're complaining about is the exact behavior that they have not only probably tolerated, but encouraged in the home.
in the home and their children, that's right.
So they've encouraged their children to
question
speak up,
authority,
to
to
question
speak up,
authority, to take
Not
what
be
they
shy,
can,
get
not be
credit,
shy.
take credit.
Serves them right.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly. It's
Your
all our
kids
fault.
are here.
I have some therapy to suggest in the family. I find that boomers, because we're so used to knowing everything, don't ask enough questions of kids about what their world is like. I just, thanks to one of my kids, just got a Facebook page, something I thought had nothing to do with me or my generation, and suddenly I'm being contacted by people I went to grade school with, which is kind of fun that they're there too. There's a whole world out there that we tend not to see because we either don't want to give up what little bit of authority we by now claim, or because we don't think there's anything we can learn.
Do boomers think of themselves ever as old? I mean, you talk so much about this need to be youthful or...
Well, youthful is kind of a state of mind. Boomers certainly know they're getting old. They just want to approach age, or older, that's right. They just want to approach age with a more youthful spirit. And so it is about breaking the rules and reinventing themselves going forward. We interviewed boomers back in '96 when they were first turning 50. The leading edge was first turning 50, and we asked them the age at which old age starts. And the answer for the beginning of old age, the average answer was 79 and a half. Now, in 1996, the average lifespan in America was 76.1. So boomers didn't even think they were going to start to get old until 3 years after they had died. So boomers are getting older. They are dealing with all the physical and lifestyle changes, but they want to approach this in a youthful way.
And camping forever on the River Denial. Thank you so much for joining us on Life Part 2.